Hello everyone, and welcome to today's panel webinar on managed security and how to boost security posture through outsourcing security to experts. My name is Holger Schulze, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar as we discuss the managed security landscape and review recent research answering questions such as what benefits can organizations expect from outsourcing security to a third-party service provider, what motivates organizations to consider outsourcing of security, what security services do companies most commonly outsource, and finally what selection criteria are most important to find the right managed security services provider. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's panel of managed security experts. First, I'd like to introduce Josh Douglas. And Josh is Chief Strategy Officer at Raytheon Foreground Security. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you, Holger. Super excited to be here.
Excellent. Thanks for being on our panel. Next, I would like to welcome Chris Hendricks, Vice President of Security Operations Services at Delta Risk. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Holger. Good to be here.
Thanks for being with us. And next, I would like to welcome Eric Permenter, Founder and Chairman of Lynx Technology Partners. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you, Holger. It's an honor to be here.
Awesome. Thanks for being on our panel, everyone. Now, again, my name is Holger Schulze, and some of you may know me from the 360,000 member information security community that I've managed on LinkedIn. And without further ado, let's get started. Now, earlier this year, the information security community on LinkedIn conducted a pretty comprehensive research study surveying thousands of IT security professionals to explore current cybersecurity trends, organizations' investment priorities, and cybersecurity solution choices. And one of the first questions we asked in our survey was about the key barriers that inhibit organizations from defending themselves, if you will, more effectively against cyber threats. And we found that the three biggest obstacles to stronger cybersecurity are all about skills and resources, starting with a lack of skilled security employees, followed by a lack of budget, and a lack of security awareness among employees. Now, the shortage of skilled security experts is a recurring theme, if you will, in our research, and we will address it again later in the webinar. But first, let me pick our first audience questions on this topic. And let me ask Eric, what is more important, having best practices supported by, say, junior talent, or having access to very talented people if and when technology fails? Eric?
That's a great question, Holger. I think as you consider a managed security service provider partner to help overcome some of the obstacles that are identified in this slide, an MSP should not only provide qualified expertise to oversee things like firewall and antivirus and patching, but I think they also need to have a holistic outlook on how they are going to protect their clients. MSPs should be able to demonstrate that they are in a position to implement security change to create that more holistic outlook for protecting an organization. And under that holistic outlook, you have to take into account technology, management, adaptability, and compliance. And I think lastly, an MSP should absolutely have the empathy to understand and ensure how they need to go about protecting an organization. So I think it's a combination of solid expertise with proven methodologies and best practices.
Thank you, Eric. Now, next we asked our survey audience about their key motivations for selecting a managed security service provider, and the same familiar, theme is emerging again. The key driver for organizations to consider, managed security services is mostly lack of internal security resources and expertise to cope with the growing demands, right, of protecting data, systems and applications against increasingly sophisticated and persistent threats. Now, this is closely followed by a desire to reduce the overall cost of security operations, right? Next, followed by a desire to move to continuous 24/7 security coverage. And after all, right, adversaries and malware don't sleep. And finally, this is followed by improving an organization's compliance posture and finally increasing the speed of incident response. Now, our next audience question is about how managed service providers can alleviate the number one issue, right, lack of talent. Let me ask Joshua at Raytheon. Josh, the question is, when considering an MSSP for filling the hole created by a lack of talent, what factors should a company consider? Josh?
Yeah, Holger, I mean, it's good to see that we're getting out of the gate with some tough questions. I love that. So, it's rightfully so that talent is a major consideration for choosing a MSSP. I mean, this is the same thing that we've actually seen in our own studies from CISOs, across the industry. So it's lining up nicely. So I think when you're actually looking to fill those talent gaps, I mean, there's a few factors to actually take into consideration, actually. Are they able to think like an attacker? Can they actually perform an assessment against your environment to be able to show you where those risk and business area, concerns are actually across the board? Do they really believe that security is more than just a solution or a compliance checkbox and are actually looking to shift the burden to the attacker, right? Can they actually tell you which alerts are important and critical to your business, or do they actually believe in just throwing those alerts over the wall? Because I think when you start and get into those pieces, you start to also understand, do they believe in the personal relationship that comes with security? Which, I think that we see or saw in the previous chart too, that there's that communication issue that occurs even within the internal organization, no matter what departments they are. And I think that's a misunderstanding of how security works. So you need to start looking for that in the talent. And then, really the last question that you need to start to understand at that point in time is really, how experienced are those people that are actually participating in security with your organization as an MSS? You can take a look across the board on the number of years of experience that they have, what sort of, certifications that they actually contain as an organization, and are you actually dealing with the same people day to day? When you start to look at that more holistically and not just, can they check the box of, talent and really understand how the relationship is built too, and understand if they know your organization, you're really starting to see an advancement in security as a whole.
Excellent. Thank you, Josh. And this is a great segue to our next topic. And basically, we asked our survey audience, what factors are most important to you when selecting a managed security services provider? And the results are interesting, yet not entirely surprising. As one would suspect, security expertise is by far the most critical capability, right, that organizations look for in MSSPs, followed by cost, right, number two, and then number three, breadth of capabilities. All of these are in very close alignment, right, with the key drivers for managed security that we explored just a few minutes ago. Finally, reputation and flexibility to adjust to clients' specific needs, if you will, round out the top 5 MSSP selection criteria you see on the screen. And on that note, I'd like to direct the next audience question to Chris at Delta Risk. The question is, with security expertise being so critical, how do MSSPs establish and maintain the expertise required? Chris?
Thanks, Holger. Yeah, so how do we do this? Well, first I'll say that it's a challenge even for MSSPs to establish and maintain expertise and talent. This is something that we work really, really hard to make sure that our teams are solid to provide the type of stuff that Josh mentioned earlier. So I guess in our experience, there are a few ways that MSSPs in general establish and maintain talent. The first is we need to draw in experienced teammates. So bringing in people who have a background and we often do this by establishing connections to what we call pipeline sources. So in addition to doing what we do internally, we're looking to find places with experienced folks who are maybe looking to move on into a managed security role. So in our case, at Delta Risk, for example, we leverage the national security space, so military, law enforcement, and intelligence. Also, teammates that have experience on large corporate teams. So we especially focus on security-focused industries like critical infrastructure or finance. So you got to draw in that experience right out of the gate. And then once we have that, there's also formal training, so both in-house and third-party. Most MSSPs have rigorous programs for keeping their people sharp, and we do that through things like certifications that was previously mentioned, tool-specific credentials depending on the kit that you're using. And MSSPs have the luxury of making this training security-specific, which sometimes in-house security teams don't have that luxury. And then lastly, I would say that the most important way that we keep the expertise and maintain it is through on-the-job experience. So there's nothing like having multiple customers relying on you and asking a diverse set of questions and presenting a diverse set of challenges to hone your skills as a team. So you learn it on the job.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, that makes perfect sense that as an MSSP, you're exposed to a much broader array, right, of situations than almost any single enterprise would. Now, next, we asked our survey participants about the benefits, right, that they're receiving from outsourcing security to a third-party service provider. And the two most frequently mentioned benefits are improved security, right, and reduced cost. And that's precisely two of the main drivers for organizations looking to outsource information security in the first place. Now, improved availability, flexible capacity and scalability, and increased efficiency round out the top 5 benefits on the screen. And these findings, well, they confirm that organizations generally do receive the overall benefits, right, promised by managed security providers. And by the way, just as a sidebar, the numbers on the screen may look low because this chart is based on a question that was a multiple selection question with many choices in addition to the top 5 shown here on the screen. And interestingly enough, many survey respondents selected a wide range of benefits that they received instead of just 1 or 2. And that's reflected in the numbers. But let me pick our next audience question and ask Josh at Raytheon, why do you think that we don't see more cost savings from moving to an MSSP? Josh?
Holger, you're pointing out a great point here first that, there's such a diversity across the board and how everything gets impacted, depending on your industry, your enterprise, et cetera. But, I mean, cost is one thing that is typically common across the board on what you're spending money on. And I think there's a few reasons here as to why some people may feel like they're not getting the cost benefits from their MSS. The first and most, apparent one is actually if a company has no infrastructure, they have no security starting point, you're starting at ground zero, and it's going to require an influx of cash to get everything off the ground. That includes infrastructure, policy, processes, aligning it to your business, et cetera. The second one is that if you already have a pre-existing infrastructure and you happen to choose a MSS that requires you to take all of your existing investment in infrastructure and replace it with new products, you're creating technical debt there and some depreciation. And it's going to take a while for that scale to actually hit zero, where you can move on from that point and actually start to see some of the benefits from the MSS. And then the third one that I think occurs is actually, a misunderstanding and, where they should be allocating that money. And that may come from just trying to check the compliance box and not really having a true assessment, a risk assessment of the enterprise, and understanding what are the priorities that it takes to create an effective security posture. And that could be, understanding if there's security awareness training, that you need additional, practical assessments like pen testing, et cetera, of your existing security organization, putting in place a proper incident response plan, or even moving on to, fully managed security across the board. And then the last item that, I think is often overlooked completely across the board is that if you choose the wrong MSS that has weak talent or actually has a push-button mentality, you're going to have added costs that come with that. Because if incidents or events are actually being thrown over the wall back to your pre-existing security team or even your organization as a whole to validate and understand if they're true incidents to your business, you're basically hiring phone jockeys at that point in time and not the security talent that you need to be able to get true validation. And that's a huge unaccounted expense that most organizations don't account for when they're looking for that low-cost managed security service provider.
Interesting. Thank you, Josh. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. The next question we asked in our online survey was about the most important capabilities, right? Organizations would like MSSPs, managed security providers, to provide. And it turns out that the most requested managed security capabilities are security monitoring, followed by event correlation and alerting, and next, intrusion detection and prevention. And we do have a couple of questions coming in on this topic, and let me just take one for now and revisit the others later during Q&A. This question is for Chris at Delta Risk. With many security vendors offering hardware and software solutions for security monitoring, why are so many companies looking to an MSSP to handle this for them? Chris?
Thank you. It's a great question. I think we have to explore some of the incentives here in the industry. So when we think about the challenges is trying to solve a lot of problems, and you want that to be as simple as possible. But I think really what this boils down to is that the tool vendors, the hardware and software vendors here, are kind of caught between a rock and a hard place in the current market. So they need to advertise to their constituents that, one, they're so much different and so much better than their competitors, so they have to differentiate. At the same time, they also want to say that they interoperate smoothly with everything because it's a very diverse market. So they have these kind of a tension between differentiation in the market with features and so on, and also interoperability and smoothness with other investments. And I think that in our experience, when faced with that dilemma, most of these tool vendors, software and hardware, understandably emphasize differentiation because they're trying to sell that product. And so they'll end up providing kind of rudimentary data export and data pull APIs to handle that tie-in, that interoperability. So there's still a lot of heavy lifting for the customer when they buy the tools to integrate all of these features because they're emphasizing the differentiation. And so, since no tool purports to do everything, we get a huge complexity that comes out of this. And I think, we've seen that MSSPs are actually a pretty good fit for helping manage that chaos or that complexity, because when it's done well, we've seen a lot of these tools, we have that experience, and frankly the incentive to get the most out of all the tools our customers already have in place. So whereas a tool vendor is looking to differentiate, we make the biggest impact by getting the most mileage out of all the existing stuff that's already been deployed. So I think that explains a little bit why companies reach out more and more is to do some of that heavy lifting of integration and get the mileage out of the investments that they've already made.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. That's great advice. Next, we asked our survey audience what security advisory services they would consider outsourcing to a security service provider. And the top 3 advisory type of services that companies outsource include penetration testing, security assessments, and education and training to basically stay ahead of evolving security threats and maintain a strong security posture. Now, the next question from our audience is for Arik at Lynx Technology Partners. And Arik, the question is, what is the right balance of shared responsibilities between the MSSP and the customer? Arik?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think most managed security service providers are recognized for having strong support around key technologies and/or offerings in a specific area. For example, they may focus on providing Cisco firewall support and be very strong in doing that because they've been a leader in their industry, and or specializing in an endpoint technology, just because they may have aligned with a software vendor and the like. And what that does, right, this level of specification ensures that the MSSP has the right level of education, training, and capability within its ranks. So when you start thinking about the shared responsibility, you must first define what that MSSP is recognized for, and then you have to look at where where the gaps are between what your internal team is going to provide and other partners. For example, you may have an advisory services company who is providing one of these capabilities like penetration testing, security assessment, and the like. You want your MSSP to be able to collaborate nicely with that advisory services firm so that you're working together as a team, and you want to try to ensure that whatever the MSSP and or advisory services firm is providing you is a direct complement to your internal team's expertise. As you go through that, you need to ask some additional questions like, what are you trying to accomplish as far as your requirements? And I think once you start to define that as a team, right, a collective team, the MSSP, the advisory services, and your internal security team will ultimately define the boundaries to make up where the shared responsibilities ultimately play themselves out as part of the business arrangement.
Excellent. Thank you, Arik. That's helpful advice. Finally, we asked our survey participants about their organization's budget outlook, right, for managed security services. And about a third of organizations predict a budget increase for managed security services over the next 12 months. And by the way, with 31%, this budget line item for managed security is receiving one of the largest responses for predicted budget increases across all IT security budget areas, right, that we asked about in our survey. So this is quite significant. Now, let's take a minute to recap. Let me ask our panel, what are, in your opinion, the most important considerations and best practices, key takeaways, if you will, that companies should consider when selecting a managed security services provider? And again, let me ask our panel this question round robin, perhaps starting with Josh. Josh, what are your best practices recommendation for our audience?
Yeah, thanks, Holger. That's a great question. So, for us, it's really about shifting the burden to the attacker, right? And to do that, there's a few things you have to take into consideration for those best practices when choosing, a managed security service provider. And the first one is are they just another check the box, or are you actually getting something more? You want to select a partner that embodies your company and really drives to collaborate by understanding your business. And by that, I mean they on-ramp, they understand, the key aspects within your company. It could be, understanding the high-value targets that you have within the organization. It could be understanding where your revenue streams typically take most of their inputs from. And then the second one really is do they actually really protect you and drive down dwell time? The industry average for dwell time is in the magnitude of like 320-ish days when you combine mean time to detect and mean time to respond. Now, that doesn't even take into account that, actually trying to mitigate the problem, doing cleanup, and having customer notification. If you're spending countless time actually answering the calls of the other side, be it, MSS that's telling you have yet another alert, and they're not doing the actual investigation to identify if you actually have an inside or outside threat, maybe they're not the right partner for you. And then lastly, does your organization have true talent? By that I mean, does the organization that you're dealing with, the MSS, your partner, have true talent? Or are they actually selling you, butts in seats or minds behind keyboards? If the MSS actually depends totally on technology and not really smart people to help your organization, this is a true recipe for disaster because there's no technology today that's so smart and can reason so well that it can weed out all false positives and be able to respond to every single event inside of an enterprise and actually hunt for new types of techniques that are being used by the attackers today to be able to find those advanced threats. If that was the case, we would see a ton more technology being sold left and right off the shelf that worked, and it will come down to one technology. It really is going to come down to the human mind in combination with proprietary technology or even just technology in general that's actually being collaborated together with the enterprise organization to provide true security.
Interesting. Thanks, Josh. And you're making a good point, right? If there was a silver bullet, we would have found it by now. And it takes an array, right, of technologies and services to really robustly, protect an enterprise. Thank you, Josh. Arik, what is your key takeaway? What are your best practices you would recommend?
Sure. When I think about that question, and great response, Josh. I think there's three things that I'd like to leave everyone with. One is, be sure you understand what you require from that MSSP and know exactly what you are paying for. I think too often, you have the perception that you're getting more coverage than what you need, and you don't realize that you're not covered until you have an incident and the finger pointing starts. So you want to make sure you define those requirements and know exactly what you're paying for. The next thing was actually highlighted on a previous slide, which is, a cheap MSSP is a bad thing, right? I like that they were focusing on the expertise before they were focusing on the cost. And I think that when you back that up with very strong references, you can start to identify a solid MSSP that will be a good fit for you. And then lastly, I think we just got to remember that at the end of the day, no matter who you partner with for your MSSP, security is the responsibility of you and your team, right? You can't take your hands off the wheel. You got to hold them accountable for the things that they commit to for you. So in summary, the desire to push the security responsibilities to another is very clear and understandable, but you got to do the due diligence and make sure that you're getting the right provider.
Excellent. Thank you, Arik. Three great points. And Chris, your recommendations. What do you want our audience to take away from today's panel webinar? Chris?
Thanks. Both great responses and covered some things that I would have said. To slightly differentiate or take a slightly different tack, I think it's a best practice for companies to acknowledge and understand that an effective security team actually requires a pretty huge investment of resources if you choose to do this internally. So maybe by looking at it as a counterfactual, what if we had to do this ourselves? What would that investment look like? And when you start to break that down, the people that are involved, the processes that need to be established, the technology that might need to be put in place, you start to quickly realize that the costs of developing this stuff in-house are complex and sometimes hidden. You won't know the depths of those costs sometimes until you're halfway down that project. And so really I think the best practice here is to realize what those true costs are to your team and your size of company and your industry, and then realize that managed security providers, MSSPs, can provide a really solid way to benefit from that type of investment in people, processes, and tech, even when you're doing it in-house is not the right fit. So MSSs have to do that type of investment and have already sort of paid those dues on your behalf. And the best practice here is to really understand what those true trade-off costs are, and that way you don't make some of the mistakes that Arik and Josh mentioned about finding a misfit. You actually know what those true costs would be, and then you find ways to partner with MSSPs that have made the right investment in all three of those areas to bring that to bear on your behalf.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Now, we have more live audience questions coming in, and MSSPs seem to understand security very well. How do you determine if an MSSP understands your infrastructure and applications? Who wants to take this one?
I think that, when you're starting to question that, if they have an on-ramp period that does not involve, asking how your current business actually runs, or even have an on-ramp period to understand, how, cash flows, your security organization, your HR, if they don't ask proper questions like that and their entire intention is to put a firewall of some sort of IDS at the perimeter of your network, more than likely they're not there to understand your business. They're just there to actually, answer alerts and be able to tell you that they see known activity. They're not doing anything like proactive threat hunting. They're not actually doing a risk assessment to tell you where you might be weak based upon your business. And often, they're going to look out for your best interests to understand where you should be allocating the money in the first place.
Good points. Thank you, Josh. All right, let's pick the next question here. And the question is, does security certification play a vital role? And I think that, that makes sense. Perhaps we'll modify this a little bit. What roles do security certifications play? And who wants to take this one?
I don't mind speaking to that, Holger. This is Chris Hendrick. So I think there's two places where we see certifications kind of interest. One is with the personnel that are staffing the SOC at the MSSP, and there's a variety of different ways to look at that. The benefits of that certification-driven approach are that you do have a common vocabulary for discussing certain skill sets. I would say that in our experience, however, just having essentially a certification doesn't give you 100% confidence as to the expertise of the staff. So it's a good vocabulary. It allows you to sort of start at the same baseline. However, as Josh mentioned in his previous answer, there's an interaction between the customer and the MSS that has to explore behind the certs what's really going on there, and is that a good fit. And then there's other certifications, for example, for infrastructure, making sure that the data for your MSS is stored appropriately and so on. And those are a lot more, I think, critical in terms of meeting requirements for regulatory agencies and things like that. And so that style of certification, for example, SOC 2 Type 2 or the HIPAA compliance and so on, allows you to make sure that you attest that your data is being stored appropriately. So I think those two elements of the human beings on the SOC side as well as the infrastructure. But in any case, you have to go beyond those certs and have good questions about how those really impact you and make sure that you're getting the right fit.
Very good. Thank you, Chris. The next question is about performance indicators. What are the best key performance indicators, KPIs, that I should define with my MSSP? Panel?
This is Eric. Yeah, this is Eric. I guess I'll take that one. I think it depends on your business. I think each executive team is interested in things that indicate high performance for their business and security for their business. For example, we deal with quite a few financial services firms, and they're less interested in the noise and more interested in understanding how activity is going outside of their compliance frameworks, right? Their governance, risk, and compliance frameworks. There's others that we're dealing with that are focused on cyber situational awareness, where they want to start to capture those key performance indicators from the end user standpoint, and they're deploying applications to be able to do that. But I think that the standard ones that you'll often see is, how many virus alerts are you managing? How overwhelmed are your SIM? How is that being correlated back into your data risk and retention policies, and ultimately you end up with an executive dashboard that puts the executives and the incident response team in a good position to be able to respond in a more timely fashion as things go outside of the norm, if you will.
Excellent. Thank you, Eric.
Holger, if you don't mind, I'd like to add to that too.
No,
so, Eric,
absolutely.
those were great points, especially around the business alignment. And we definitely have seen that from our customers as well, them wanting specific KPIs and dashboards. But the one thing that we've actually seen them resonate with, tremendously across the board, be it finance, the critical infrastructure space, healthcare, government, otherwise, from those customers, is that, they really want to know, like, how are you actually containing the threat? How are you responding, and how are you making them better every single day? So there's one metric that we've actually, that we've been using at Raytheon as a whole, not just our managed security services, for quite a while, and you see across the board, is dwell time. So how can we actually reduce the response time and the notification to be able to drive that down? And that really judges how well your incident response program's working, how well your actual detection capabilities are, and whether or not you're getting ahead of the threat. And when we talk to them about that, and they actually hear it from the CISO's perspective, and they can go and talk to their board, it's very simple for them to explain, we're doing our job, and we're getting better at it because we put in the right processes, the right technology, and most importantly, the smart people to do the job.
Very good. Thank you. A couple more questions. Let me pick this one about regulation and mandates. What are the key regulatory drivers for security in general? And let me modify this question specifically in regards to managed security. What regulatory drivers perhaps even favor a managed services approach?
I suppose it's my turn if we're going kind of round robin here. This is Chris Hendricks. So one thing that we find to be a regulatory requirement of some frequency are good, solid reporting. So a lot of our tooling is set up in such a way that we can provide visibility to regulators in a recurring reporting way. So, in addition to the security impact stuff that we've talked about, which of course is critical, you also have to be able to tell that story. And it's not just KPIs as far as security performance, but also things like failed logins and various other things like that, where you have to be able to show that you're keeping track of those things and that you're retaining data for appropriate amount of time and things of that nature. So there is definitely, in addition to the security impact stuff that Eric and Josh were talking about just on the KPI question, there is a little bit of this kind of long tail of maybe drier or more banal kind of reporting requirements that are still just as critical. And so, it's critical to talk to your MSSP about what those requirements look like from a routine basis, and then getting that stuff automated. And what can help there is the MSSP's ability to integrate multiple tools together into one reporting story. We find that to be true whether it's, again, HIPAA, PCI DSS, or others.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. The next question is, how many different MSSP relationships should one enterprise consider having?
This is Josh again.
Josh.
I think that this really depends, right? On a couple factors. One, can you have one single managed security service provider that meets all of your needs? Possibly. Are they going to do everything phenomenally? Probably not. So you may need a couple in the past because, if you look at the managed security services market across the board, it's fragmented. You have identity access management, you have people that manage firewalls, you have all these other things, people that are basically doing proactive threat hunting, they're doing risk assessments, they're doing pen testing, red teams, and they may be experts in various different levels, and you may actually want some of them to compete against each other. So, a red team may be somebody that you don't want to work well with your other managed security services providers. But at the same token, if you're looking from an active defense and a proactive threat hunting perspective, you are going to want those individuals to work well together. So you need to make sure that at least the managed security services that are being provided can work together and also will cooperate. I've seen in past experience of looking at other enterprises where there have been a couple of vendors that basically start pointing fingers. That's not what you want. You want a collaborative approach that basically, helps you build an organization and a security posture that protects your organization. And if you can't get that from 15 vendors and can only get it from 3, then go with 3.
That's good advice. Thank you, Josh. All right, let's see. The next question is about sort of preemptive or reactive cybersecurity. The question is, are MSSPs typically responsible for identifying cyber risk in advance, or do they just react to cyber risk? And yeah, I think this one, let's open it to anybody on the panel, round robin or not, who wants to take it.
Yeah, I think everybody can chime in on that one. I think this goes back to the point that I was making in my best practices, right? If you define your needs around having a more proactive approach, you definitely need to align with an MSP that can deliver upon that. I think the way that you can identify whether or not they are more proactive versus reactive is you start to, before you retain them, look at their policies and procedures. Right. This is often overlooked. Look at proposals, you look at SLAs and mean times and the like. But if if they're not able to articulate how well they implement their policies and procedures, it'll be very difficult for you to determine whether or not those policies and procedures result into a proactive versus a reactive model.
And Eric, I think you're right. We all have different perspectives on this one for sure, and I think that's sound advice. I think that I'm going to be a little bit edgier on this one and say that I don't know why you'd want to look at reactive security in the first place. It's failing.
Correct. Yep.
Reactive security is gotten to a point where we have people in our networks for almost a year plus. We're depending upon signatures, alerts, and even some heuristics, machine learning, et cetera, to tell us about all the badness. And we're not taking the right steps forward to start to push the boundaries of security and starting to drive down that dwell time metric that I talked about. Because what we should be doing is trying to figure out how to get them out of our network, much in the same way that we would want a virus out of our body. And even so, I mean, if we don't have that, that ideology to be more proactive, we basically get into the state where we're making ourselves victims. I mean, you wouldn't want somebody inside of your house, a burglar, for 100 days. Why would you want them in your enterprise for 100 days?
That is a fine question.
Yeah. Sorry, that's longer. But it would be one way to do that, of course, is with effective incident response. So that the proactivity for detection is absolutely critical. And of course, having a mature incident response tie-in with your MSSP is sort of by its nature reactive, but that doesn't mean it's ineffective. So by proactively detecting good things, you still have to have a very mature response model that helps contain, eradicate, and ultimately help your colleagues and, again, your customers recover. So, for us, and while we certainly agree about leaning forward on detection, having a good procedure whereby you can get this stuff out that is by its nature reactive and can be really effective at reducing the overall cost of some of these incidents.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. Also, thank you to our audience for submitting outstanding questions. All right, we're now pretty much at the finish line of today's webinar. Many thanks again to Joshua Douglas with Raytheon, Chris Hendricks with Delta Risk, and Eric Perminter with Lynx Technology Partners, for sharing your unique insights and advice regarding the, unique value offered by managed security services. On behalf of our panel, I'd like to thank our audience for joining us today and for asking great questions. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Now, this concludes today's webinar, and I hope we will see you again at one of our future webinars. Thanks, everyone.